The ascent of Jaxon Tanner. Jaxon Tanner stood backstage of the gleaming studios of National Spotlight, heart thrumming like a racehorse's hooves. 5 years ago, he'd been a penniless dreamer in South Atlanta. Today, he was on the brink of changing the national conversation. His company, SynTech Innovations, had just closed a $200 million Series C funding round, making him the youngest black tech CEO to reach unicorn status. Jaxon's journey began in a cramped apartment where his mother worked double shifts at a diner and struggled to pay the electricity bill. He and his 2 younger sisters shared a single room, where Jaxon stayed up late teaching himself to code by the light of a small flickering lamp, learning discipline and resourcefulness in the process. At 18, he launched an AI-driven language tutor in partnership with a local coding bootcamp. A modest seed investment helped him iterate the platform, test it in underserved schools, and prove its positive impact on student engagement and performance. Now, at 27, Jaxon understood the weight of expectations on him. Investors scrutinized quarterly metrics. Employees hoped his vision would yield stable careers. Entire communities looked to him as proof that systemic barriers could be overcome. He wore this responsibility like a mantle, heavy, formidable, but honored. Backstage, the hum of monitors and technicians' chatter was muted by thick walls. Jaxon adjusted his cufflinks in a small dressing room mirror, checking that his navy suit fit just right. No flashy jewelry, no bold patterns, just an impeccable appearance that communicated professionalism. Around him, producers finalized scripts, cameramen tested angles, and makeup artists applied discreet touch-ups. A stagehand tapped his shoulder. "You're on in 30 seconds. Ready, Mr. Tanner?" Jaxon inhaled deeply and recited his key points. The power of ethical AI, the necessity of equitable education, and the importance of representation in leadership. He reminded himself that his mission went beyond profit. It was about creating pathways for the next generation. As the countdown ended, he walked through a curtain of blinding lights into a cavernous studio. The polished wood floor gleamed under overhead fixtures, and multiple cameras trained on him. At the center sat Blake Carson, the morning spotlight host. His practiced smirk was affable, but Jaxon knew better than to trust a facade. "Jaxon Tanner," Blake began, voice warm but edged with challenge. "Welcome to the show. You've been called the wunderkind of tech entrepreneurship. Some say you represent everything right about America. Others call you a token. What do you say to both camps?" Jaxon settled into the chair opposite Blake, hands clasped. He offered a calm smile. "Thank you, Blake. I'm honored by the recognition, but I'm more interested in substance than symbolism. SynTech isn't a trophy. It's a tool to transform education." The audience applauded politely. Blake leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Transformative, yes. But let's address something everyone's wondering. Do you believe systemic racism still holds back talented people? Or is success simply a matter of grit and good ideas?" The question landed like a gauntlet. Jaxon's pulse quickened. Years of preparation crystallized into a poised response. He paused, choosing each word. "Success requires both opportunity and resilience. My story shows resilience, but opportunity demands dismantling systemic barriers. Underfunded schools, biased hiring, lack of access to capital. Until we tackle those issues, talent alone won't suffice." Blake's expression flickered. "So you're saying that hard work isn't enough?" Jaxon leaned forward, voice steady. "Hard work is essential, but it exists in context. If you race with weights on your ankles, no amount of determination will win. We need to remove those weights for everyone." A murmur ran through the audience. Blake exhaled sharply. "That's a strong metaphor, but some argue that emphasizing disparity perpetuates victimhood. How do you respond to critics who say focusing on systemic racism divides us rather than unites us?" Jaxon's gaze was unwavering. Uniting requires truth. Pretending disparities don't exist only deepens the divide. Acknowledging and addressing inequality is what actually brings us together around solutions. Education reform, equitable funding, inclusive hiring. Blake opened a folder, leaning back. "Let's shift gears. SynTech's latest product is an AI dashboard that predicts student learning patterns. Critics worry about data privacy and algorithmic bias. How do you ensure fairness and protect students' information? Jaxon welcomed the question. He outlined SynTech's rigorous encryption protocols, independent bias audits, and transparent consent processes, describing partnerships with ethicists and community stakeholders to refine algorithms. Moments after leaving the stage, Jaxon paused beside a bank of monitors displaying rolling news and social media feeds. Tweets praising his composure scrolled alongside threads decrying political correctness mad. News outlets replayed his key quotes on loop. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Invitations from podcasts, emails from school principals seeking partnerships, and a message from one of his teachers expressing pride. In that instant, Jaxon realized that 5 minutes of discourse had ignited a national dialogue he could leverage to drive real change. As the segment neared its end, Blake offered a final jab disguised as praise. Impressive. You've navigated tough questions. But tell us, Mr. Tanner, did you go into business to change the world? Or to prove you could beat expectations for someone of your background? Jaxon smiled, warmth in his eyes. I embarked on this journey because I saw injustice and wanted to build solutions. If my success shifts expectations for others like me, that's a welcome byproduct. But my purpose has always been impact, not image. The studio lights dimmed slightly as cameras cut away. Blake nodded, mask of professionalism restored. The audience applauded with genuine enthusiasm. Jaxon stood, shook Blake's hand, and walked off stage, heart flooded with relief and renewed determination. He had spoken his truth, controlled, measured, and uncompromising. This was only the first step in a larger mission, to reshape America's educational landscape and redefine opportunity itself. Backlash and support. The morning after Jaxon Tanner's exchange with Blake Carson, the world awoke to a transformed landscape. By dawn, Tanner vs. Carson had ignited every social platform, splintering public opinion into two fierce camps. Some hailed Jaxon as a hero, a truth-teller who refused to acquiesce to coded racism on national television. Others decried him as an angry agitator, accusing him of grandstanding and politicizing education. But no matter which side of the chasm one occupied, everyone was talking. SynTech Innovation's sleek Atlanta headquarters resembled a war room. Digital dashboards displayed real-time social analytics. Sentiment graphs spiked wildly, showing 68% positive engagements, 23% negative, and the remainder neutral but engaged. The marketing team scrabbled to adapt messaging. Customer service triaged incoming calls, some thrilled to learn they could tangibly support a CEO with convictions, others irate over perceived anti-American rhetoric. Press releases flew back and forth. The public relations director drafted an initial statement expressing pride in Jaxon's principled stand. The legal team cautioned against incendiary language lest it jeopardize partnerships. Jaxon arrived at 8:30, energized yet cautious. He greeted employees in the open plan atrium. Handshakes, pats on the back, enthusiastic congratulations, echoes down the glass-walled corridors. His executive assistant, Marisol, hustled papers toward him. We have interview requests from PBS, CNN, and the Washington Post. Plus, the board insists on an all-hands meeting at 11. He nodded. Thank you, Marisol. Let's schedule PBS for next Tuesday morning. I'll sign off on the all-hands agenda. Marisol paused. And the board. They're proposing a celebratory marketing campaign. Tanner Unfiltered. Shall I share your counterpoints? Jaxon exhaled. I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I don't want to capitalize on controversy for profit. If we announce anything, it should be about our new Tanner Foundation. Understood, Marisol said, typing furiously. She looked up. Also, there's a protest forming outside National Spotlight Studios in New York. Supporters delivering petitions and flowers. Simultaneously, a counter-protest by Carson loyalists at the same address. A lump formed in Jaxon's throat. He hadn't intended to spark demonstrations. His goal was policy change, not spectacle. Yet spectacle was unavoidable in modern media. Keep me posted, he said softly. At 11, Jaxon entered the boardroom. Investors and board members occupied leather chairs. His chair at the head of the table felt disproportionately large. Across from him sat the chairwoman, Eleanor Zhang, her expression inscrutable behind rimless glasses. "Jaxon," she began. "First, congratulations. Your performance last night has energized our investors." She tapped a report showing a 12% uptick in pre-IPO stock interest. "But we've also received word of potential advertiser pullouts. Major telecom sponsor is reconsidering." Jaxon sat forward. "Eleanor, let's be clear. If sponsors withdraw because I spoke truth, I'd rather forfeit that funding than compromise my integrity. Our mission is to serve communities, not appease fear." A murmur rippled around the table. Eleanor raised a finger. "I respect your stance. But from a fiduciary standpoint, we need a contingency plan. I suggest we accelerate the Tanner Foundation launch and redirect marketing dollars there. Show the public we're not just another tech company chasing headlines." He nodded. "Agreed. Let's finalize the foundation's charter and set an initial endowment of $5 million. It will fund coding labs in 10 underserved school districts this year." The board members exchanged approving glances. A consensus formed. Controversy would drive attention, but strategic philanthropy would channel that attention into concrete impact. After the meeting, Jaxon retreated to his glass-encased office overlooking downtown Atlanta. He stared at the skyline's jagged silhouette, mental gears still turning from the morning's whirlwind. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "I saw you last night. So proud." He smiled, his shoulders relaxing. Then another. "Simone, you were amazing. Just call me later?" He typed back. "I will. Love you." A pang of guilt flickered. He had promises to keep beyond boardrooms and studios. At 2 o'clock, he joined a live panel on a cable news network. 3 pundits sat on a set draped in red, white, and blue. Jaxon felt the artificial heat of studio lights and the weight of millions of viewers. The host introduced him as the young CEO who went toe-to-toe with Blake Carson. The first question: "Mr. Tanner, do you regret your tone last night? Some saw it as aggressive." Jackson's reply was calm. "I regret nothing but the persistence of systemic inequities that made that exchange necessary." The tone reflected the urgency of the conversation. If we can't challenge outdated narratives on national television, where can we? His words elicited applause from a live studio audience and a flurry of on-screen graphics highlighting key quotes. One pundit, known for conservative leanings, accused Jaxon of playing the race card. Another defended him, pointing out that challenging power structures was essential in a democracy. The debate raged, but Jackson's voice remained measured and articulate. Minutes after the segment ended, the clip went viral, driving another spike in SynTech's website traffic, this time to their careers page, where applicants left notes like, "I want to work where leadership speaks truth." Meanwhile, in New York City, a small cadre of activists gathered outside National Spotlight's headquarters. Holding placards reading "Thank you, Jaxon" and "Racism has no place here," they sang protest songs and chanted in rhythm. Across the street, a smaller group waved "Free Carson" banners and shouted counter-slogans. Police kept the peace, but social media live streams flickered with footage of both sides. Jaxon watched the scenes unfold on his tablet, awed by the raw energy and civic engagement his words had inspired. By early evening, Jaxon returned home to Charlotte Park, the suburban neighborhood he'd bought last year. The house was quieter than his corporate life. 2-story brick with a small lawn and jasmine plants by the front steps. Simone greeted him at the door, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. "You've been non-stop," she said softly, slipping her arm through his. "I made dinner." He inhaled the aroma of roasted vegetables and baked salmon. "Thank you. I'm famished." They sat at the kitchen table. Simone asked about the day's events, board decisions, media circuits, social media tsunami. Jaxon answered candidly but kept his gaze on her. Over dinner they talked not of politics or tech policy, but of simple things. An upcoming trip to visit her parents, a movie she wanted to see, the new Italian restaurant down the street. For a moment, he relaxed into ordinary life, grateful for the anchor she provided. Afterward, they stepped onto the back patio under string lights. Cicadas droned softly in the humid night. Simone leaned her head on his shoulder. "You did something important today," she said, "but promise me you'll rest." "I will," he murmured, kissing her hair. Tomorrow, I fly to D.C. to meet with Senator Delgado. That's where the real work begins. Simone looked up, determination shining in her eyes. I know, and I'll be cheering you on every step of the way. Jaxon squeezed her hand. The day's tumult receded as they stood together beneath the stars. He thought of the backlash and the support, the polarized headlines and the grassroots movements. The attention was dizzying, but he felt more certain than ever of his path. The world had watched him speak truth on national television. Now it was time to turn conversation into action, and to prove that a single voice, grounded in conviction and compassion, could move an entire nation toward real, lasting change. Washington Interlude. Jaxon Tanner stepped off the private jet onto the tarmac at Reagan National Airport, the late morning sun glinting off the White House lawn in the distance. The motorcade whisked him through D.C.'s historic avenues, past the Jefferson Memorial's white domes and the brick-faced buildings of Capitol Hill, each landmark a reminder that American ideals were forged here. A knot of anticipation twisted in his stomach. He had faced cable TV hosts and boardrooms. Now he would stand before senators crafting laws that could remake the technological landscape for decades. Senator Maria Delgado greeted him as he entered the Senate office building. Her staff hustled past in business suits and lanyards, clutching tablets and briefs. Delgado, a pragmatic Democrat whose reputation for bipartisan bridge building matched Jackson's own collaborative ethos, ushered him into a polished conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Capitol dome, its white marble glowing against a cerulean sky. Jaxon, thank you for coming on such short notice, Delgado said, extending her hand warmly. Your interview was the spark we needed. The chair of the Commerce Committee wants to hear your expertise this afternoon. He nodded, shaking her hand firmly. I'm honored, Senator. Let's get to work. Delgado gestured to a rectangular mahogany table where 8 aides in neatly pressed suits waited. Laptops were open, screens showing headlines about SynTech's unexpected rise, and the number Tanner effect trending nationwide. 2 minutes later, the committee chair, Republican Senator Robert Haynes, known for his skepticism of targeted federal programs, entered with an air of cautious respect. He offered a curt nod to Jaxon. Mr. Tanner, Haynes began, voice low but clear. Your exchange with Blake Carson brought attention to education inequity. But talk is cheap. This body needs concrete proposals. Senator Delgado has briefed me on your foundation plans, but we need policy solutions that can scale nationwide. Jaxon took a breath. He rose and moved to a coat rack, retrieving a rosewood presentation binder embossed with the SynTech logo. Inside were 3 sections: federal grant structures, tax frameworks, and an AI ethics oversight proposal. He placed it on the table, then clicked his remote to illuminate slides on a wall-mounted screen. Thank you, Senator Haynes, Jaxon began. I've outlined a 3-pronged initiative. First, establish the Federal Innovation in Education Grant, an annual fund of $500 million dedicated to creating technology labs in underserved public schools. Each lab would receive hardware, software, and training for educators. Based on pilot programs in Atlanta and Detroit, we estimate measurable improvements in student engagement and standardized test scores within 2 years. He clicked to slide 2, a bar graph showing before and after data from partner districts. Haynes leaned forward, nodding slightly. Second, Jaxon continued, introduce the Emerging Leaders Tax Incentive, offering a 20% credit to startups that meet diversity benchmarks in leadership roles, specifically 25% representation from historically underrepresented communities. This leverages private sector innovation by rewarding companies that mirror America's demographic mosaic. An aide furiously typed notes. Jaxon flipped to slide 3. A schematic of an AI ethics oversight board. Third, create an independent Congress-chartered AI ethics oversight board under the National Science Foundation. This board, comprising technologists, ethicists, educators, and civil rights advocates, would conduct annual audits of educational AI systems to identify and correct bias, ensuring transparency and public trust. He paused. Together, these measures offer immediate support, economic incentives, and long-term ethical governance. They're bipartisan in spirit and grounded in real-world data. Silence settled. Haynes tapped his pen on the table. Impressive, Mr. Tanner. But where do we find the $500 million annually? Our budget is already stretched. Jaxon anticipated this. Reallocate a fraction of existing federal education funds, specifically, redirect underutilized Title II professional development dollars. Combined with a modest 5-year extension of the existing technology bond financing program, the net fiscal impact is budget neutral. In fact, long-term gains in workforce development and reduced remedial education costs could yield savings exceeding $1 billion over a decade. Haynes glanced at one of the aides, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Delgado spoke up. Your numbers check out with our preliminary estimates. She turned to Haynes. This is the kind of data-driven approach we need. At that moment, a photographer entered and snapped shots of Jaxon pointing at slides. Jaxon ignored the flash, focusing on the senators. After 5 minutes of technical follow-up questions, from encryption protocols to grant oversight mechanisms, Haynes leaned back, expression thoughtful. Mr. Tanner, your proposal is sound. I'll introduce this framework as amendments to the next education appropriations bill. Senator Delgado and I will shepherd it through committee. He extended his hand. Thank you for your leadership. Relief and exhilaration coursed through Jaxon as he shook Haynes's hand. Delgado beamed. The audience of aides exhaled, voices rising in congratulations. Flashbulbs continued to pop, capturing a moment he had worked toward for years. Later, in Delgado's office, they debriefed. You cleared the biggest hurdle, she said, handing him a folder of press talking points. Expect questions from conservative media, but we'll have your back with data and success stories. Jaxon scanned the folder. It contained scripts about pilot outcomes, testimonials from students and teachers, and infographics illustrating the bipartisan support his plan had garnered. Thank you, Senator. I'm ready for whatever comes next. He stepped into the hallway, where interns handed out press badges. Reporters followed him with cameras, lobbed questions. How do you respond to critics who label your proposals as socialist? Do you feel like you're overstepping as a private citizen? Jaxon fielded each calmly, reiterating his mission to build opportunity, not ideology. Back at Reagan, on the return flight to Atlanta, Jaxon reflected on the day. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also an invigorating sense of purpose. He opened his laptop and drafted an email to SynTech employees. Team, today, we presented our vision to Congress, and they listened. This is a victory for every child denied equal educational opportunity. But the work is just beginning. Thank you for your commitment. Let's keep innovating for impact. Onward, Jaxon. He paused before hitting send, thinking of his mother's sacrifices, Simone's unwavering support, and the millions of students whose lives might change because of these policies. He had moved from studio lights to Senate chambers, from television soundbites to legislative action. The trajectory of his journey felt unstoppable, and more crucially, it felt rooted in genuine possibility for change. As the plane descended into the Georgia sunset, Jaxon gazed out at the landscape. Tomorrow he would brief the SynTech board on next steps for the Tanner Foundation's launch, meet with community leaders in Atlanta, and plan the rollout of the new pilot labs. But for now, he savored a fleeting moment of triumph. He had taken a conversation sparked by a TV host's provocation and channeled it into concrete proposals to reshape America's educational future. The shockwaves were only beginning to reverberate, and he intended to ride them all the way to lasting progress. Media empire collapse. The morning after the Senate meeting, Jaxon Tanner anticipated a flurry of follow-up calls from SynTech's board and his foundation's advisory council. Instead, his inbox was dominated by urgent messages bearing a single, astonishing headline. National spotlight plummets. Blake Carson, suspended indefinitely. The network's official statement cited damage to brand reputation and viewer trust, following Carson's on-air exchange with Tanner. Advertisers had begun to withdraw funds, and the show's affiliate stations issued their own letters of dismay. Jaxon sat at his kitchen island, unopened coffee cooling beside him as he absorbed the news. Within hours, morning drive radio hosts and online op-ed writers dissected the network's decision. Some praised the network for taking a stand against Carson's controversial tactics. Others decried the move as capitulation to political correctness. Pundits speculated wildly about the network's next steps. Would they replace Carson with a more balanced host? Cancel the program altogether? The situation offered Jaxon both vindication — he had never sought to destroy a career — and trepidation. If a network could crumble in the wake of one guest's rebuttal, what did that portend for civil discourse? By midday, SynTech's board convened an emergency video conference. Jaxon joined from his home office drone of partisan chatter in the background. On the main screen sat Eleanor Jiang, chairwoman of the board, her expression both relieved and guarded. To her right, the CFO, Mark Liu, tapped nervously on his desk. Other board members drew digital annotators across graphs depicting the impact on their corporate partnerships. "Jaxon," Eleanor began, "this is unprecedented. Your segment sparked a national conversation and took down a media pillar. We have advertisers asking for assurances that SynTech isn't aligned with partisan cancellations. At the same time, your core supporters are urging us to double down on our commitment to social justice. We need a clear strategy." Jaxon leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "First, let's acknowledge that what happened wasn't personal revenge. It was an overdue reckoning. The network benefited from divisive, sensationalist content. When that content imploded, the fallout was inevitable." He paused, letting the point sink in. "SynTech isn't sponsoring agendas. We're championing solutions. Our response should be to reframe this moment as proof that truth and integrity matter." Mark Liu cleared his throat. "Reframe how?" "We're talking about pulling nearly 30% of our marketing budget from that network. If we don't redirect those dollars, our bottom line takes a hit." "Then we redirect," Jaxon replied decisively. "Accelerate the Tanner Foundation launch and deploy those funds toward community tech labs. Use the publicity to highlight educational equity rather than a media spectacle. The question we answer is not, did Tanner destroy a TV host? But how will Tanner change the lives of thousands of students?" Eleanor's gaze softened. "I like that. And our PR can emphasize philanthropic commitments. No mention of network drama, just tangible outcomes." The board nodded in agreement, and within 24 hours, SynTech issued a press release unveiling a $10 million initial endowment for the Tanner Foundation, earmarked for creating digital innovation centers in 10 historically underserved school districts. News outlets covered the announcement with headlines like, "Tech CEO turns controversy into community investment," and "From TV feud to education funding." Seizing the momentum, Jaxon authorized production of a documentary series titled Tanner's Truth, chronicling his life from a South Atlanta apartment to the corridors of power. He insisted on creative control, stipulating that the narrative focus on grassroots impact rather than headline-grabbing conflict. The producers embedded cameras at coding workshops, followed Jaxon to Capitol Hill, and captured candid moments with program beneficiaries, students who built their first apps, educators who finally had modern tools, and families whose children now saw a future in STEM fields. When the first teaser for Tanner's Truth dropped on social media, it bypassed traditional news cycles. Clips showed Jaxon crouched beside a 7th grader debugging her code, scrambling to secure additional grant funding in a cramped government office, and laughing with his sisters in their childhood home as they toured a newly installed computer lab. The tone was intimate, hopeful, and devoid of self-aggrandizement. Viewers responded in droves. The teaser garnered 12 million views in its first week, and pre-orders for the full series soared. Meanwhile, National Spotlight's parent company scrambled to patch the holes. They announced that Blake Carson would remain suspended pending a comprehensive review, and that rotating guest hosts would fill in temporarily. But the network's credibility had fractured. Market analysts downgraded its stock. Rival morning shows saw ratings spikes as audiences fled the controversy. Industry insiders whispered of an impending sale or merger. For Jaxon, it was a disconcerting reminder that institutions built on sensationalism could not withstand genuine accountability. SynTech's internal culture, by contrast, flourished. Jaxon visited the Atlanta headquarters to personally thank employees for their resilience. In the main atrium, he was greeted by a flash mob of coders, designers, and support staff chanting, "Tanner for change." He laughed, his nerves melting. During a town hall-style Q&A, he addressed concerns about the company's image. "Our values define us, not our headlines," he said. "We build products that empower learners, not controversies that divide communities." The employees erupted into applause. That evening, Jaxon retreated to a hosted screening of Tanner's Truth at an independent theater. The room was filled with teachers, students, nonprofit leaders, and local politicians. The first episode, highlighting the Clayton County pilot, ended with a standing ovation. As the lights rose, Jaxon joined a panel discussion. Teachers spoke of newfound engagement in classrooms. Students shared plans to apply for STEM scholarships. Community organizers praised the series for spotlighting systemic issues with nuance. A local councilwoman leaned in and said, "You've turned a firestorm into a flame for hope." But change came with challenges. Not everyone celebrated. Conservative commentators continued to frame Tanner's Truth as an ideological platform masquerading as a documentary. A prominent journalist wrote an op-ed accusing Jaxon of corporate propaganda and profiting off racial tensions. SynTech's legal department braced for potential defamation suits. Yet Jaxon refused to react with anger. Instead, he invited the journalist to tour a school lab in Memphis, then sent her unedited footage. When the article was revised to a more balanced account, he considered it a small victory for transparency. Amid this public maelstrom, Jaxon's personal life regained clarity. He allocated blocks of time each week to Simone, instituting date nights and weekend getaways. He discovered that stepping away from the media frenzy recharged his creativity and empathy. In a rare 24-hour break, he and Simone visited Savannah, wandering the historic streets unrecognized. They talked about their wedding, tentatively scheduled for next spring, and the family they hoped to build. The simplicity of those moments reinforced his conviction. Progress must encompass professional achievement and personal fulfillment. By the end of the month, the dust had settled. National Spotlight's ratings remained in decline, while Tanner's Truth averaged 6 million viewers per episode, a ratings triumph for streaming platforms. SynTech's stock edged upward, buoyed by investor confidence in the company's mission-driven strategy. The Tanner Foundation selected its first 8 school districts for lab installations and began recruiting mentor volunteers from SynTech's employee base. Late one Friday afternoon, Jaxon gathered his executive team for a progress briefing. Reports showed that student participation in pilot districts had increased by 40%, and 9 out of 10 teachers rated the new technology highly effective. The team celebrated with cold brew, coffee, and pastries. Jaxon looked around the room, gratitude warming his chest. "We turned a moment of controversy into an engine of change," he said. "That's the power of aligning purpose with action." They toasted his words. As dusk settled over Atlanta, Jaxon paused on the rooftop terrace of SynTech's headquarters. The city lights shimmered like a galaxy of potential. He thought back to the day he first walked onto the set of Morning Spotlight, a nervous young man determined to speak truth. Now, he had leveraged that moment into a movement, displacing a media titan, forging policy proposals, igniting a foundation, and producing a documentary series that elevated real voices. But the journey was far from over. The Tanner Foundation's lab still needed mentors, policymakers still needed persuasion, and countless students still awaited opportunity. Jaxon closed his eyes, inhaling the warm breeze. Controversy had been the spark, but community impact was the blaze he intended to sustain. With resolve burning brighter than ever, he descended from the rooftop to continue building, innovating, and transforming the nation. One student, one policy, and one lab at a time. Personal costs. Late-night rain rattled against the windows of Jaxon Tanner's home office as he stared at the city skyline, veins of streetlights winding through downtown Atlanta like glowing arteries. He had just wrapped a video conference with education leaders in Chicago, followed by another call to finalize the Tanner Foundation's mentorship program. Every day felt like 3, conflated by electronic calendars and pinging notifications. He rubbed his eyes and glanced at his phone. 1:47 a.m. He should have been asleep hours ago. His mind drifted back to an email from Simone that day. It simply read, "I'm proud of you, but I miss you." He closed his eyes, guilt knotting his chest. Since the Blake Carson interview, his life had accelerated beyond anything he could have imagined. He'd given countless speeches, testified before Congress, overseen the documentary production, and shepherded the foundation's launch. Yet each victory came at a price. Time with his fiancée, weekend walks through their neighborhood, even quiet dinners at home. Jaxon leaned back in his chair and replayed the prior evening. Simone had tried to mask her frustration with supportive words, but he heard the tremor in her voice when she said, "I understand how important this is, but I don't recognize my fiancé anymore." He'd squeezed her hand and promised he'd carve out space. Yet promises, like New Year resolutions, were easy to make and hard to keep when the world demanded more of him every minute. He tried counting the weekends he'd spent entirely consumed by work. There was the weekend he flew to Detroit to install the first code lab. He had promised to take your fiancé's Sunday brunch, but Simone ended up ordering avocado toast by herself at a corner cafe. There was the time he missed his sister Maya's college graduation because of an unscheduled board meeting. And most painfully, he had canceled a long-planned weekend getaway to Savannah to prep for his Senate testimony. He could still hear Simone's disappointment when she texted, "I'll go without you." He'd replied with an apologetic emoji, but the distance had deepened. Turning away from the window, Jaxon opened a drawer and pulled out a framed photo. Himself, Simone, and their golden retriever Nala, posing on a beach at sunrise. They wore windbreakers, cheeks flushed from the cold, and genuine smiles. Moments before he'd proposed. He pressed his thumb against the glass and whispered, "I'm sorry." The photo was a reminder of the life he risked losing in his quest to reshape education and equity. The following morning, flattened by fatigue, he arrived at SynTech's headquarters with dark circles under his eyes. He ignored the curious glances from colleagues as he made his way to the executive suite. His calendar showed no breaks for the next 3 weeks. Meetings with tech partners, interviews with international media, a roundtable with civil rights attorneys. He wondered how his mother, who had raised 3 children on a diner salary, would react to seeing her son on the brink of exhaustion. She would remind him, as she always had, that rest was not indulgence, but necessity. She'd taught him that resilience required intervals of renewal. At 9 a.m., Simone called on his personal line. He silenced the ringtone and let it go to voicemail. Minutes later, guilt surged. He found an empty conference room and returned her call. Her voice was soft. "Hey, were you able to eat something?" He ran a hand through his hair. Lunch was a granola bar in the airport lounge. She sighed. "Jaxon, I'm worried about you. You've been burning the candle so hard it might catch fire." A pause. "Can we have dinner tonight? At home? No screens? No calls?" He glanced at the door, then at his phone. Yes, I can do that. 6 o'clock? Perfect, she said, relief evident. I'll make your favorite, chicken marsala. Thanks. Love you. I love you too. See you at 6. He ended the call and realized how badly he needed the anchor of her voice. He scheduled a firm block on his calendar. Personal. Dinner with Simone, 6 to 8 p.m. No exceptions. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and presentations. At 5:55, he slipped out of the boardroom, murmured apologies, and dashed to his car. The highway was clogged, the sun low, painting the sky with ribbons of pink and gold. He texted Simone, "Running late. We'll be there by 6:30? She replied with a lipstick kiss emoji. By 6:40, he turned onto their street and saw her silhouette through the front window. The table was set. 2 place settings, a small vase of daisies from the grocery store, and warm lighting from a single lamp. Nala bounded to him as he entered, tail wagging furiously. "Hey," Simone greeted, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she met him in the kitchen. "I made extra sauce. I know it's been a long week." He wrapped his arms around her. "Thank you for waiting. And for this." He inhaled the scent of sautéed mushrooms and garlic. "Can I help?" She handed him a wine glass. "Just sit, relax. You deserve it." He pulled out a chair and sat at the table, the drone of his mind quieting in her presence. Over dinner, they talked about her work. Simone had taken a new role at a nonprofit focused on community development, and her upcoming presentation to donors. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions and resisting the urge to mention his board meeting tomorrow or the press Q&A next week. After dessert, a slice of chocolate torte, Simone set her fork down. "I miss this," she said softly. "Talking to you. Laughing." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I missed you too. I realize I've been so absorbed I forgot why I'm doing all this. Not just to change systems, but to build a life worth living. With you." She squeezed his hand. "I know. And I want to be part of it. But I need to feel I have a place." He nodded, eyes bright. "You do. Always." That night, as they cuddled on the couch watching a cooking show, he felt the tension in his shoulders begin to unwind. Nala nestled at their feet. He realized that even the loftiest goals, equitable education, ethical AI, policy reform, were sustained by personal relationships. If he broke those bonds, he risked losing the very foundation that grounded him. Over the next days, Jaxon made subtle changes. He instituted no-meeting Fridays for his executive team, encouraging them to take time for rest or creative thinking. He swapped a podcast interview for a lunchtime walk with his mother through a nearby park. He texted Simone random messages. "Thinking of you. Can't wait to see you tonight. Pick a movie for us." These small gestures reassured her, and himself, that balance, though elusive, was not impossible. One afternoon, he surprised the SynTech offices by organizing an impromptu family day event. Employees were welcome to bring loved ones to tour the labs, meet the team, and attend a barbecue on the rooftop terrace. He personally greeted children who marveled at robots performing simple tasks and teenagers eager to learn coding. Simone and his mother joined the festivities, smiling as Jaxon introduced them to colleagues. Watching his two worlds converge felt deeply satisfying. But old patterns die slowly. In a late-night strategy session for the documentary series, Jaxon found his mind drifting to pressing deadlines. He caught himself drafting emails in his head while a producer spoke. He excused himself, stepped outside to the terrace, and called Simone. She answered on the first ring. "Hey, everything okay?" He closed his eyes against the night sky. "I'm here. I just needed to hear your voice." "I'm always here," she replied. "Even when I can't be physically present." Her words anchored him. He stayed on the phone for 10 minutes, listening to her day, the mundane joys and small frustrations, and sharing a few of his own. When he finally returned to the meeting, he felt reinvigorated, present in a way he hadn't been in weeks. As the chapter of personal costs continued to unfold, Jaxon Tanner understood that leadership was not merely measured by breakthroughs on TV or in Congress, but by the health of the relationships that nurtured his humanity. The fight for equitable education and ethical innovation would demand every ounce of his energy. But without the solace of love and the support of family, that fight risked hollow triumph. And so, with renewed resolve, he committed to winning the battles that truly mattered, both for the millions of students depending on him and for the woman who had planted the roots of his ambition and carried him through the storms of life and leadership alike. The policy battle. The gilded chamber of the Senate Education Subcommittee was quieter than Jaxon Tanner expected. High-backed leather chairs circled a long mahogany table, and behind frosted glass, officials hustled to find documents. As he approached the witness table, aides adjusted microphones and laid out folders strewn with annotated copies of his proposals. The bill he helped craft, the Federal Innovation in Education Act, had cleared the Commerce Committee with strong bipartisan support, only to stall here amid a tangle of competing interests. Jackson's heart thudded. He recalled the optimism of the hearing room in Delgado's office when Senator Haynes pledged to introduce amendments. Now, 5 weeks later, the legislation was mired in objections from telecom lobbyists, educators' unions, and skeptical appropriations chairs. Some critics argued the grant funding would duplicate existing programs. Others warned that tax incentives could drain state revenues. The subcommittee chair, Senator Elaine Vaughn, a moderate Republican from Ohio, peered at her tablet, her expression inscrutable. Mr. Tanner, she began, voice clipped. We appreciate your initiative. But as you know, funding priorities require careful calibration. Before we decide on allocating $500 million annually for new labs, we need to address concerns raised by several witnesses. She tapped her screen. Specifically, the National Teachers Federation questioned whether this federal program infringes on local control, and the Education Technology Council cautioned against oversight that could stifle innovation. How do you reconcile these competing perspectives? Jaxon adjusted his tie and spoke with measured confidence. Senator Vaughn, local control is vital. Our proposal complements, not replaces, district-level decision-making. The federal grants provide resources. Districts choose how to implement them. In Clayton County, for example, administrators selected software aligned with their curriculum standards. Regarding the Oversight Board, its role is advisory, ensuring transparency and algorithmic decision-making without prescribing specific technologies. He clicked the remote, illuminating a case study slide. In Detroit Public Schools, a pilot grant enabled local leaders to integrate SynTech's AI dashboard with existing pedagogical tools, boosting reading comprehension scores by 18%. The Oversight Board simply audited the algorithms for bias, finding no significant discrepancies, and released a public report. Teachers retained autonomy. Students benefited from tailored instruction. Senators whispered among themselves. Vaughn nodded slowly. Thank you. But the National School Boards Association also expressed concern about ongoing costs, maintenance, staff training, software updates. Did your financial models account for these variables? Jaxon was ready. Absolutely. The grant includes a 10-year service agreement covering hardware maintenance and educator professional development. After 10 years, districts can negotiate continuation contracts directly with vendors or apply for renewal grants. Our cost-benefit analysis projects that long-term gains in reduced remediation and higher graduation rates will outweigh ongoing expenditures. He displayed a multi-year projection graph. Even under conservative estimates, districts could see a 2-to-1 return on investment within 5 years. A gray-haired senator with a skeptical air, Senator Martin Delgado, not related to Maria Delgado, leaned forward. Mr. Tanner, let's talk about the tax incentives. You propose a 20% credit for startups with diverse leadership. Critics argue that manipulating tax policy can skew market dynamics and create loopholes. How do you prevent abuse? Jaxon paused to choose his words. Senator, our plan includes rigorous certification standards and annual audits. Companies must submit verifiable demographic data and demonstrate active mentorship programs. A third-party nonprofit certification body will handle compliance, akin to how the Small Business Administration verifies SBA loan qualifications. Penalties for misrepresentation include tax recoupment and fines. This structure ensures integrity while promoting genuine diversity. The room fell silent. Jaxon sensed the tide shifting. Vaughn swiped across her tablet. A number of local school districts here in Ohio have partnered with for-profit educational platforms without federal support. Their success suggests that federal grants may be unnecessary. She looked at Jaxon. Why not let market forces dictate which innovations flourish? Jaxon straightened. Senator, market forces often overlook communities without purchasing power. In high-income districts, private companies can invest in sales teams and marketing. In underfunded districts, administrators lack bandwidth to vet vendors or negotiate contracts. Federal grants level the playing field, ensuring that all students, not just those in affluent areas, benefit from proven technologies. He recalled his own childhood school, where peeling paint and outdated textbooks were the norm. He visualized the hopeful faces of students in East Atlanta's pilot program, huddled around new computers. When we say all students, we mean every student, regardless of zip code, socioeconomic status, or school budget. That's the real market failure we must address. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Senator Delgado cleared her throat. Mr. Tanner, I believe your advocacy is compelling. My concern now is ensuring we have the votes. This is a close committee. Those opposed cite fiscal prudence and local autonomy. Those in favor cite equity and workforce development. Jaxon inhaled deeply. Senator Delgado, I stand ready to work with any objections. We can refine language to include state matching options for smaller districts and sunset clauses for periodic review. We can incorporate more district representation on the oversight board. My goal is not to force a one-size-fits-all mandate, but to provide a federal framework that amplifies local decisions. He paused, then added with quiet conviction. This legislation isn't about politics, it's about justice. If tomorrow's innovators are left behind today, we all pay the price. A less competitive workforce, wider economic disparities, and lost human potential. This is our moment to invest in America's future. Senator Vaughn exchanged a glance with her ranking member, Senator Patrick O'Leary, a Democrat from Massachusetts. O'Leary tapped his pen and looked at Vaughn. I move that we advance the bill to the full Senate floor, with the amendments Mr. Tanner suggested. Vaughn hesitated, then nodded. All those in favor? Hands rose around the table, 6 in favor, 2 opposed. The motion passed. A ripple of subdued applause filled the chamber. Jaxon exhaled, relief flooding him. Senator Delgado rose. Thank you, Mr. Tanner. Your willingness to engage in compromise made the difference. We look forward to your continued input during floor debates. As aides gathered their materials, Jaxon stepped down from the witness table, shaking hands with senators and staff. Reporters buzzed in the adjoining corridor, urging him to comment on the vote. He glanced back at the committee room, the empty chairs symbolizing the legislative journey ahead. He felt honored to have moved the needle, but he knew advocacy would continue on the Senate floor and in the House. Later, in a small conference room, Senator Delgado and her legislative director, Marcus Lynn, debriefed. We'll schedule the floor debate next week. Can you prepare opening remarks? Delgado asked. Jaxon nodded. Absolutely. I'll draft them this evening. Lynn handed him a USB drive with draft schedules and a list of talking points. As he walked to the Capitol subway station, Jackson's phone buzzed with congratulatory messages. His mother had texted, I watched, so proud of you. Simone sent a heart emoji. His public relations team forwarded news alerts. Bill advances out of committee. Tech CEO's push gains traction. Equity in education, a bipartisan moment. In the Metro's dimly lit tunnel, Jaxon reflected on the day's triumphs and the road ahead. The policy battle was far from over. Senate approval was just one hurdle. The House needed persuasion. Potential amendments lurked, and a presidential signature remained uncertain. Yet, for the first time, he saw bipartisan hope coalescing around a shared vision, empowering every student through technology and ensuring that innovation served the public good. He stepped onto the platform as the train screeched in. Clutching his binder, he felt the weight of responsibility, but also a lightness, a sense that dedicated, informed advocacy could indeed bend the arc of technology policy toward justice. The fight would continue in legislative backrooms, on floor debates, and through relentless community engagement. But tonight, Jaxon Tanner allowed himself a quiet moment of satisfaction. They had won the committee's vote, and with it, a lifeline for students across America. Legacy secured. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Oval Office, glinting off polished mahogany and casting slats of gold across the assembled dignitaries. At the center stood President Ava Mitchell, flanked by Senator Maria Delgado and Senator Robert Haynes, holding a silver pen above the final page of the Federal Innovation in Education Act. Jaxon Tanner sat in the front row, heart pounding. After months of televised debates, committee battles, and grassroots advocacy, the bill that would channel $500 million annually into underserved school districts and establish ethical AI oversight was about to become law. Today, President Mitchell began, voice warm, we make real the promise of equal opportunity. With this legislation, we empower every child, regardless of zip code, to harness the power of technology and fulfill their potential. A flourish of applause rippled through the room. Jaxon exhaled, relief and pride surging in equal measure. The president signed her name. Cameras clicked. Journalists scribbled. Jaxon stood and joined the senators at the desk. Hands shook. Senator Delgado leaned in and whispered, "You changed history today." Jaxon managed a nod, eyes glossy. Later, beyond the press gaggle, Jaxon exited into the south lawn, where a small stage had been erected for remarks. Families of pilot district students lined the front row, waving handmade signs. "Thank you, Jaxon, and education for all." The dry grass crackled underfoot. Taking the microphone, Jaxon scanned the crowd. He thought of his mother teaching him to read by lamplight, of Simone waiting in Atlanta, and of the countless students who would walk into new labs. "Today is a victory not for me, but for every student who believed they could not be seen," he began. "This law ensures that no learner is left behind because of circumstance. Let us honor that promise by delivering on it, together." The thunderous applause that followed echoed not only through the lawn but across the nation, carried on streaming news platforms and social media. In the days that followed, the Tanner Foundation moved at breakneck speed. The first request for proposals went out to school districts identified by the Department of Education as most in need. SynTech teams, paired with foundation staff, drafted grant applications, technical plans, and training modules. Jaxon spent early mornings reviewing site visits in Detroit, afternoon conference calls with rural district superintendents in Mississippi, and evenings coordinating with nonprofit partners. The pace was relentless, but he felt buoyed by purpose. 2 weeks later, he traveled to Sunnyside Elementary in Cleveland, the first official lab installation under the new law. As he stepped through the school's entrance, a chorus of cheering students erupted. They led him down a brightly painted hallway to a spacious classroom, transformed into a gleaming innovation hub. Rows of laptops lined new desks, vibrant posters detailed coding basics, a 3D printer hummed quietly in the corner. 12-year-old Aliyah Jaxon stepped forward. "Mr. Tanner," she said, voice shy but steady. "I wrote my first program yesterday. It told me jokes and did my math homework. Thank you for this." Aliyah's words landed like a gentle thunderclap. Jaxon knelt to her level. "You did it, Aliyah. Technology is a tool, and you wield it brilliantly." He rose and inaugurated the lab by pressing a ceremonial button, and a ribbon printed with the Tanner Foundation logo unfurled across the doorway. Flashbulbs popped as smiling children crowded around him. The local NBC affiliate interviewed Jaxon on site. As he spoke about measurable improvements in reading scores and student engagement, parents looked on with tears. A teacher approached afterward. "You've given us more than hardware. You've given these kids hope." Jaxon felt tears prick his own eyes. Back in Atlanta, Blake Carson watched the Sunnyside segment on his living room TV. The former morning spotlight host, quiet since his suspension, sat in an oversized armchair, jaw clenched. The network had offered him a chance to return, but he'd declined. The public rebuke had cut deep. He muted the volume as Jaxon described the lab's impact. Something in Carson's heart shifted. The next morning, Jaxon arrived at the SynTech office to find an envelope on his desk. Inside was a note in Carson's handwriting. "Let's talk. I owe you an apology, and an invitation to share your story on a platform that reaches millions." A simple, sincere gesture. The embers of reconciliation. That afternoon at a downtown cafe, Jaxon met Blake. The tension lingered as they swapped grudging pleasantries over lattes. Finally, Blake leaned forward. "I let ratings drive my questions, not substance. Your responses that night, and the work you've done since, exposed my own blind spots. I was wrong. If you'll have me, I want to profile your mission on my new digital series." Jaxon studied Carson's earnest eyes. He recalled the invective and the conflict, but he saw genuine contrition. "I accept," Jaxon said, extending his hand. "But no sensationalism. My focus remains on students and teachers." Blake nodded. "Agreed." Meanwhile, the Tanner Foundation's first 8 labs were fully operational, and student participation metrics soared. A national conference in Chicago gathered educators to share best practices. Jaxon presented preliminary data. A 35% increase in STEM enrollment in pilot districts, a 22% rise in career tech interest, and improved teacher retention due to enhanced professional development. Policymakers and philanthropists buzzed around, pledging additional resources. SynTech employees volunteered as mentors, bridging corporate expertise with classroom needs. In late September, Jaxon traveled to San Antonio for a Fortune 40 Under 40 gala, where he was slated to receive the Social Impact Award. As he ascended the stage to accept the crystal trophy, he spotted his mother and Simone in the front row, smiling, cheering. He inhaled deeply and addressed the audience. This honor reflects the work of countless individuals, students, educators, partners, legislators, and my family. True leadership amplifies the voices of many, not the voice of one. The applause swelled, but Jackson's mind traveled back to the children in Sunnyside, to Senator Vaughn's decisive committee vote, to the moment President Mitchell signed the bill. Those were the victories that truly mattered. That night, at a rooftop after-party overlooking the San Antonio skyline, Jaxon and Simone danced beneath string lights. The city's festive lights twinkled like code waiting to be unlocked. He whispered, "We did it together." She rested her head on his shoulder. "And this is only the beginning." As autumn turned to winter, the Tanner Foundation expanded its reach to 40 districts. SynTech rolled out a free online platform giving real-time progress dashboards to parents and policymakers. Policymakers began eyeing similar legislation in other countries. For Jaxon, legacy took shape in classrooms and living rooms, not headlines. On Christmas Eve, Jaxon and Simone volunteered at a local coding workshop. Kids built simple games, siblings cheered on, and parents marveled at their children's newfound confidence. As the last group packed away their laptops, a young boy tugged Jackson's sleeve. "Sir, when I grow up, I want to start a company like yours." Jaxon knelt beside him. "Then you will, because you know it's possible." In his nephew's wide eyes, he glimpsed the future he had fought for. The road ahead still held challenges. Scaling sustainably, ensuring bipartisan support, guarding against mission drift. But in that moment, Jaxon Tanner felt the solid foundation beneath his feet. His name would not be the story. It would be the catalyst for countless other stories. And for that, he knew his legacy was truly secured. The shockwave across America. The spring air carried a charge of optimism as Jaxon Tanner stepped onto the stage of the National Education Summit in Denver. Banners behind him proclaimed equity through innovation. The auditorium brimmed with educators, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and students, many of whom had been directly touched by the Tanner Foundation's labs and SynTech's programs. As he raised his hand for silence, Jaxon surveyed the crowd. A mosaic of ages, races, and backgrounds united by a shared belief in the power of technology to transform lives. "Good morning," he began, voice steady and warm. "When we started this journey, few imagined that a conversation on a morning talk show could ignite a movement. Today we see how one moment of truth can ripple across an entire nation." He paused, letting reporters' cameras capture his expression. But a moment alone does not change systems. Change happens when communities embrace opportunity, when policies align with passion, and when each of us commits to lifting others. He then unveiled the summit's centerpiece. A real-time interactive dashboard tracking the progress of every allocating district under the new federal law. Attendees watched as metrics updated live: participation rates, improvement in standardized test scores, teacher satisfaction surveys, and internship placements in local tech firms. Districts in Arkansas, New Mexico, and Puerto Rico displayed impressive gains alongside early adopters in Michigan and Ohio. The room buzzed with appreciative murmurs. After his keynote, Jaxon joined a panel of governors, district superintendents, and student representatives. Questions ranged from, "How do we ensure rural communities aren't left behind?" to, "What safeguards exist to keep data private?" Jaxon and his colleagues spoke candidly about challenges: broadband disparities, the need for ongoing teacher training, and the importance of community engagement. When a young student from a Wyoming district described her newfound dream of becoming a software engineer, the audience erupted in applause. In that moment, Jaxon felt the electric certainty that his work was building not just programs, but hope. Meanwhile, across the country, local news outlets ran human interest segments on Tanner Foundation success stories. In Compton, California, a robotics team coached by SynTech mentors won a regional competition. In rural Vermont, a middle school used AI-driven tutoring to close reading gaps within 6 months. Social media platforms flooded with hashtags like #Tanner Effect, #Tech Equity, and #Future Coders. Even some of Jaxon's harshest critics tempered their tone, highlighting that bipartisan legislation and corporate accountability could coexist in service of children. But the true shockwave came when a major fast food chain announced a new scholarship program in partnership with SynTech, pledging funds for students who excelled in the foundation's labs. Within days, a national retailer launched an internship pipeline reserving 20% of its STEM internships for students from underrepresented districts, citing Jaxon's model as inspiration. Major tech conferences included Tanner sessions on equity and ethics panels. The cultural conversation had shifted. Equitable access to technology was now mainstream policy, not fringe advocacy. Back in Atlanta, SynTech's headquarters buzzed with activity. The marketing team monitored partnership inquiries by the hour. The product team iterated new features based on educator feedback. The Tanner Foundation staff fielded invitations to international education forums. Jaxon moved between offices, stopping to high-five a junior engineer who'd just debugged a new remote learning module, then offering a word of encouragement to a foundation coordinator finalizing a community outreach plan. His presidency of impact had become a reflex, an integral part of daily operations. Yet amid this whirlwind, Jaxon remained focused on the human core of his mission. One Thursday afternoon, he visited a neighborhood community center in Birmingham, Alabama. The center's director, Ms. Rosario, led him past colorful murals to a windowless room outfitted with laptops, tablets, and 3D printers. A dozen students, ranging from 5th to 12th grade, were engrossed in designing an educational game on environmental science. They paused as Jaxon entered. "Mr. Tanner," the youngest shouted, eyes bright. "We've been updating our code to include a water conservation module." He knelt beside them, observing their screen. "Show me how it works." One by one, they explained their logic. Conditional loops modeling rainfall, user inputs prescribing water-saving strategies, interactive quizzes reinforcing learning. Jaxon asked about the challenges they'd faced: debugging logic errors, debugging network lags, interpreting sensor data. The students talked through solutions with confidence and enthusiasm. "You're already thinking like engineers," he said. "Keep pushing those boundaries." As he toured other labs that day, Jaxon reflected on the trajectory that had carried him from a tense TV studio confrontation to this moment of collaborative creativity. Each lab visit reinforced that lasting change required more than headlines. It demanded infrastructure, mentorship, and community ownership. His gaze fell on a chalkboard in a nearby classroom listing our goals: learn Python, build a prototype, win a competition, teach others. 5 bullet points neatly drawn by a teacher who had once struggled without resources. Now, her classroom thrived. On the flight back to Atlanta that evening, Jaxon drafted an op-ed for the Washington Post titled, "After the Shockwave, Sustaining Equity in Education." He emphasized that while initial progress was exhilarating, the work of maintaining momentum and deepening impact would be harder. He proposed quarterly public reports, ongoing federal-state partnerships, and an alumni network for foundation beneficiaries, ensuring that students who graduated from the labs could mentor the next cohort. He closed with a reminder: a single shockwave can awaken a nation. But only sustained action can build a future. Weeks later, his op-ed ran as the lead Sunday feature, accompanied by photos of him teaching robotics in Compton and testifying before a congressional subcommittee. Responses poured in: endorsements from governors, commitments from global NGOs, and messages from students whose lives had shifted course. A high school senior from Maine wrote, "Without these programs, I would have never applied to MIT." A teacher in Texas emailed, "Our district's reading scores rose for the first time in 10 years. Each note underscored that the shockwave had become a steady current of progress. In a reflective moment, Jaxon sat in his home study, the framed photos of his family and early lab installations surrounding him. He opened a letter from his mother. "You've made our sacrifices meaningful, Jaxon. Keep building. Keep believing." He stared at the signed title page of the Federal Innovation and Education Act on his desk, then at the blank screen awaiting his next op-ed. The journey had transformed him from a technology CEO into a changemaker whose reach spanned classrooms and corridors of power. Outside, Atlanta's lights twinkled against an indigo sky. Jaxon thought of the days ahead, expanding the Tanner Foundation internationally, refining AI ethics guidelines for global use, fostering a network of alumni entrepreneurs. The path was uncharted, but he felt ready. The shockwave that had begun with a televised confrontation had grown into a movement reshaping America's educational landscape. And though challenges remained, he carried the conviction that truth, spoken boldly, and followed by relentless action, could indeed leave a nation in awe and ultimately in equitable advance.